Juniper Books presents The Luckiest Man in the World by Molly Cutpurse, narrated by John Crabtree PhD from his notes recorded at the time. Chapter 20.
8th of July, 2026. And she was, actually. From when I awoke to a few days later, she seemed to put our awkward conversation on hold, for she never mentioned it anymore. She brought fresh clothes, we ate well, and did a great deal of resting, if not thinking. My next appointment to remove the orthopaedic boot was not for a while, and so I struggled daily using an adjustable aluminium crutch. But at least I was glad that neither a screw nor a rod had been used. But all the same, it had been a bad break, and it would take some time to heal. By the middle of the week, I felt it was time to visit my family, and so late one afternoon, we ordered a taxi to take us to Snaresbrook. I suppose I ought not to be surprised, but of course I was recognised immediately by the driver and thought it was all a bit of a laugh. Without me asking, he told me that if he was to go anywhere, he'd go back and sort out his old woman, although he didn't elaborate on that, and we didn't ask either. Because of his familiarity, we asked to be dropped 100 metres away from our house in case he wanted to see where we went, and so I had to hobble to the house. I was surprised to find my father in, as he held late hours on occasion, but all the same it was good to see the whole family together. It ought to be known that in those days spent with Caroline in her luxury flat, I did my best to stay away from anything that mentioned the outside world, because I just couldn't be dealing with it, and Caroline had helped, doing her part. However, that was not what happened when I was confronted finally by my family, because they began to tell me everything in the smallest details about how the news of what had happened had spread well beyond the shores of the UK, and as Caroline had mentioned, my name, worldwide, had become as popular as a turd in bathwater, and the general consensus was that I had done away with Maximilian Nibley Dawson, as he, of course, had vanished both from private and public eyes. And, as much as I had disliked it, I was glad in a way, because it was the perfect way to hold a conversation with my father, which we began after dinner. On the first floor, there was a fourth tiny bedroom, and as he had turned it into his study, we retired there. It was a squeeze, but it was necessary to speak to him on my own, face to face. So what's this about then? You sound angry, Father. Of course I'm angry. Look what you put us through. Look what we are still going through. But that's hardly my fault, Father. I didn't ask to have these marks put on me. But you should have organised yourself with more maturity. Have you any real idea of the mayhem that you have brought on this family? Your mother cannot even go shopping, let alone continue her medical duties without the greatest amount of attention. And I won't even mention what's happening in connection with my own work. And the same for Maggie and Zoe. It's really not good enough, you know. I would have expected you to overcome it somehow. I did try, if you remember. Yes, I will admit that putting your hand under the wheels of a lorry took some courage. And it would have worked had Maximilian not got involved. Where is he? Perhaps it's best you don't know, Father. That's not the answer I asked for. I sent him back to a time where he'll never bother anybody again. When? 1000 AD, just before the French invaded. Yes, my education did cover basic English history. Good God. We did debate it, but after all he did and was preparing to do, what other choice did I have? Good God. Which brings me round as to why I want to speak with you alone. Go on. This is hard for me, Father, but spit it out. I want you to remove my right hand and then make sure it's destroyed completely this time. Of course, my father stared at me as if I were insane. It's the only way I can think of to end this. Get rid of the marks. They can't be burnt off by laser. And while I have them, I have no future. Everybody knows who I am and what I can do. Even coming here in a taxi, I was submitted to some stupid idea. I have no choice, Father, and you are more than capable of doing it. Have you gone completely, finally insane, boy? What do you think I can do? Stretch you out on a kitchen table and give you 2 aspirin and take it off with a penknife? Have you any idea of the complexities of the wrist? Can you comprehend just how many of the surgical team I need while working? The anaesthetologist, the calculating nurse, the surgical technicians, not to mention the residents or the medical students, the physical assistants, and on occasions even the medical device company representative. Just how am I going to persuade the hospital to allow me to remove a perfectly healthy hand? It's not emotionally healthy, and I wasn't thinking that far ahead, Father. And that's just your trouble. See a problem and take the easy way out. Let me see it. I held up my right hand and he played a brighter light over it. Well, whoever did this made a decent enough job. You'll have the scars for the rest of your life, of course. Can't do anything about that. Blood flow seems normal. You have proper motion and control. Yes. And sensations? All normal now, Father. But what? I'm in terrible pain. It's constant and really strong. It makes me feel as if I want to take my life because I can't stand it. My father jerked his head up and away from staring at my hand, and we glared at each other for a few seconds, while a flicker of recognition passed between us. Pain, huh? So much pain, Father. I see. Yes. I could see how an attached limb could do that. Are you sure the pain is too much to bear? It's constant, Father. Really constant. So constant. Yes, well, there is really no way to qualify that, of course. No way to qualify or quantify that, of course. Are you quite certain that this is what you want? Absolutely, Father. So much pain. Then I will speak with a consultant and see if it can be possible. Thank you, Father. It's better this way round rather than me building a homemade guillotine and operating it in the woods somewhere. That's the stupidest thing you've ever said. Do you think this is a Game Boy? Game Boy? I smiled. No, sorry, Father. That's right, it isn't. Undergoing the removal of a hand is a serious and complicated business. It will require at least a 5 or 6 hour operation. How long did they take to reattach that? I don't know, Father. I was ignorant of how long I was there. There was no way to tell the time. I do know that the skeleton of the hand was grown from my own stem cells. I highly doubt that. That technology does not yet exist. God only knows what your mother would say. Now leave me. I need to think. I have one more thing to say. What is that? I no longer want you to call me boy, because I am not. I don't need you or your position or money anymore. And the sooner you understand that, the quicker our relationship will advance. I hope I'm making myself crystal clear, Father. 15th of July, 2026. I spent the following 7 days basically by myself in my own flat with Caroline, sometimes visiting me in the evening, bringing supplies and keeping Joyce behind her security desk happy. Apart from a tearful telephone call from my mother, I heard no more from my family that week. which proved to be a strange and restless one for me. Although I tried my best to pursue and put in place a sense of order, hoping that it would stabilise me, nothing I did helped, and neither did I get any feedback from my father, which was disappointing, but that was to be expected. As the days dragged, I began to realise that whatever bond we ever had was now most likely severed for good. I would sometimes, for some unfathomable reason, lay on the floor for between 20 minutes to an hour. Other times I would pace, again, unaccountably. My biggest problem was dealing with the tens of thousands of letters that were still arriving, and to this end I spent an entire day pushing them from my lobby into a broom cupboard. As I never intended to open a single one, the only use I could see for them was for the foreign stamps, which I realised might be useful for collectors. But snipping off the stamps would have been a Herculean task, so I never even attempted it. I was aware, though, that I wouldn't be able to put them in the recycling bin, as there were enough of them to fill 20 bins at least, and that would have made my neighbours even more angry. But then, over breakfast one morning, I had one of my brilliant ideas, and I got in touch with the local scout group. And, to cut a long story short, 6 of them, along with their scout leader, arrived in the afternoons and began to snip away the stamps from the envelopes. I supplied them with orange juice and biscuits and black plastic bags of the letters, which had been snipped. It took a week, but they were very pleased, and so was I. The one decent source of light in my life at that time was Caroline, and continuing where we left off, we spent our evenings sitting close to each other on the sofa, doing what young people do who find each other attractive. Of course, this came as an unusual physical act for me, but because of what we had been through, it brought us closer, and after her 3rd visit, she stayed all night in my bed, therefore fully cementing the proper beginning of our relationship. Our conversations were long and varied, and it wasn't all about me either, as she told me exactly what she had been doing to finish and complete her brother's estate, and in the process discovered things that he had done which made her all the more grateful that he would never again hurt innocent people whose lives he had touched. Myself, being only vaguely aware of his crimes, listened to her not only with increasing distaste, but with an increased feeling of gladness for her. All the same, Maximilian made fleeting appearances in my dreams, and they were always of the same kind. I saw him in a transparent box, hammering on the glass walls, unable to escape as the box became smaller and smaller. I did find it strange, of course, that I could dream about a man who had probably died close to 1,000 years ago. That in itself was upsetting, and most probably caused by guilt. And the boy Sam also paid me a visit a couple of times. Yet with him, there were 2 versions, one in darkness, weak and dying, and a far healthier one enjoying the sun, strong and healthy. Therefore, Caroline's nocturnal sleepovers did draw us together, and they were times I would never forget. However, one morning after making love, our relationship almost came to an end because of something I had been putting off mentioning in it. As the early morning sun played over us and I was thinking of brewing more coffee, I got to my feet instead and stroked her hair, pushing it away from her eyes. Caroline, there's something I have to tell you. What's that, my darling? Something that I've been putting off, but because I had a text last night, I can't keep it to myself anymore. I have a feeling you won't like it. That drew her attention, and no matter how dishevelled she was, she still looked as beautiful as the day I first saw her. She was one of those rare women who had such perfect symmetrical features that no matter how hard she tried, no matter if she pulled her features into something resembling scary, it would have been impossible for her to look anything but beautiful. I don't like the sound of that. Go on, tell me the worst. What I'm going to tell you isn't something that's just come out of the blue. I've been thinking about it for some time. Actually, even while we were back in Scotland. That's when I first began to think about it. Go on. Last weekend, I spoke to my father about removing my hand. I figured that. And he told you it was a completely stupid idea. Yes, he did. Well, thank God for that. But Caroline closed her eyes in frustration. But what? I insisted, and not to go on about it, I told him that it was better that he did it rather than me attempting to do it to myself, properly this time. Where are you going, Caroline? Making coffee. If I have to listen to this crap and argue against it, I need some. I joined her in the kitchen, where she was banging coffee mugs and spoons about, making too much noise. Although I could see that she didn't want to hear my reasoning, I spoke of it anyway, and gave her the same spiel as I gave my father, all to an unusual silence until I had finished, by which time we had finished drinking and our mugs were empty. What does your mother think? She's not happy about it, but I told her that if it had to be done, then at least my father can arrange for it to be removed medically and safely under sterile conditions. Caroline, what do you want me to say? Congratulations? Have a nice day? I like you as you are, a normal man with both hands. I understand, but you more than most realise that while I have this, nothing can be normal. I can't wear gloves for the rest of my life. And as I told you, the requests for help will be ongoing. There won't ever be a time when I can find peace. Can't you understand that? Yes, of course I can understand. Helping people is so hard. That down and out you helped save his family. What a trial that was. And that Chinese woman. She wasn't Chinese. She only married a Chinese man. Whatever. She got her dad back. That must have been so difficult for you. Well, now you have been vindictive and silly. Oh, am I? Am I? What does Jennifer think of this? She doesn't know. I've only discussed it with you, and I'm regretting that now. Well, you can regret all you like on your own. Caroline, when you come to your senses, you may call me. She left me staring at my empty coffee cup, and although I had the strongest urge to go after her, to my shame, I didn't. A minute passed before I heard my front door open and then close. So there was no goodbye. A few minutes later, I watched her walk away from the building. After her departure, I spent an uncomfortable day doing absolutely nothing constructive at all, except I had another bad dream during a brief sleep in the afternoon where I was attending a funeral of the boy Sam. It was an open casket, and he looked so beautiful with his bright blue eyes and golden hair that it was impossible to imagine that he was a corpse lying in a coffin made from bright green shoots and leaves. As he was being taken away, he came back to life. Someone pulled on my arm, but I shook it off and said, "No, I want to see him." But the closer I got, the more hideous and decayed the boy began to appear. He began shouting at me, but I never understood a word. But the terror of it woke me up with a start. About 7 in the evening, my mobile sounded, and I almost ran to it, hoping that it was Caroline, but it was not, as I saw it as my father's stern face. Reluctantly, I took the call, which at least was a normal call, not a video one. He had the best and the worst news I was expecting. And unlike any normal father, He did not begin the conversation with, say, "Hello, son, how are you today?" or "Evening, John, everything okay?" No, he got straight to the point. "Make yourself free from Monday for at least 3 days. I'll collect you at 6 in the morning. You'll be going down at 4 in the afternoon. Any changes, you must let me know immediately. Is that clear?" "Yes, Father. It's all arranged then." "Why else would I be giving you instructions if it wasn't?" "Yes, Father. It's all agreed then." "Mr. English will be attending. I've been advised not to take part, which sounds like sense to me." "All right then. 6 o'clock, Monday morning. Be ready. Goodbye." "Goodbye, Father." I dropped the phone, which ironically had been holding in my right hand, and stared at the marks, as numb as I could ever remember feeling. I considered phoning Caroline, but decided against it. Now that my mind was fixed, I didn't want to have a conversation which might sway me. I wanted to hear her voice, though. Another person that I wanted to talk to, if only to share what was going to happen to me, was Jennifer. But I was halfway calling her number when I stopped, because I didn't know how I would be received. After all, she had made it plain enough about how she felt about the whole thing. I last spoke to her, of course, when she briefly visited me after my operation, and I remember, just how depressed I felt after. And she was right about many of the things she predicted, except one, which was that the National Lottery never did take legal action against me, more than likely because there was no firm practical and physical evidence. Therefore, for once, I was glad that science said that time travel wasn't possible. After all that had happened, just about everything was circumstantial and hearsay, not much use in a court of law. So for the time being, my millions were safe, and I've a feeling that after my operation, I was going to need them, because I've already decided to leave England so that I could recuperate. 18th of July, 2026. On the Monday, I was already waiting outside my block of flats, and of course my father arrived on time, and I awkwardly climbed into the taxi with my metal crutch. Apart from simply nodding in my direction, nothing was said, and no help was given. So no surprises there then. It was only as we began to get close to the hospital that had given permission for the operation to go ahead that he began to speak. "There is some concern about the procedure being performed on a patient who is already recovering from a separate injury, which is why you will undergo a thorough examination this morning." "Did you hear what I just said?" "Yes, Father, I heard." "Then buck up your ideas and listen. If you are deemed healthy enough, then surgery will begin at 4 o'clock, so expect a pre-med at 3. Got that?" "Yes, Father." Just appreciate how many people it took to agree to take part, because certainly if I wasn't the man I am, there is no chance on earth that you would get this sort of treatment. "I am grateful, Father." "Good. Then perhaps you might show it a little more often than you do. So here we are." From the moment I hobbled into the foyer behind my father, it was obvious that I had stepped into his world, and that I was leaving my own far behind. Although still so early, I had the strong feeling that the staff all knew who I was, and if they didn't, they soon did, as I was referred to as patient 1678 Crabtree, J, my father's son. After making sure that I had been properly booked in, he took one last swift look at me before he nodded once and left. As I was already garnering a certain amount of interest, a wheelchair was provided, and a silent nurse took me swiftly to men's surgical, where a senior nurse took over, and I was placed in a pleasant-looking but plain room by myself, where I was instructed to change into the gown provided and get into bed. Placing my phone to one side, I did as I was told. My father wasn't exaggerating about being thoroughly examined, and over the next few hours I learnt that when one is in hospital, one's sense of modesty is completely removed. Or at least it did that day in preparation for the operation I was about to undergo. Sometime around 2 o'clock in the afternoon, I signed a waiver and gave permission for the operation to go ahead. And here I will be honest and mention that just before I signed, I did have second thoughts, because I was only too aware of what I was giving away. But I signed anyway, and then stared at the senior nurse. Can I be assured that the hospital will properly dispose of it? My instructions are clear, Mr. Crabtree. I know my duty, and I have been instructed to supervise the theatre nurse in its destruction. She collected the forms and walked to the door and turned. Pre-med will occur at 3. She then placed her hand on the handle, but froze as she stared at me. Why are you having this done, Mr. Crabtree? It seems... You see, I cannot find the words, and neither can I explain in a way that you would understand, I'm afraid. She never replied, and she left me alone in silence with my own terrible thoughts. The hospital's timetable was as efficient as my father's, and by 3:30 I found myself in between that comfortable time between awake and oblivion, a time that I didn't care what was going to happen to me at all. I don't remember anybody coming for me. Somehow I became lost in memories and sleepiness. 19th of July, 2026. But I remember coming round and thinking that something had gone wrong, as I was still able to feel the bedclothes with the tips of my right fingers, and inwardly I groaned. The heart monitor began beeping a little faster, and all too quickly a different nurse entered and began to adjust my position. 2 more followed, and I stared at them, still under the effects of the anaesthetic. What happened? What went wrong? Nothing went wrong, Mr. Crabtree. We're just checking your vitals, that's all. No, I meant my hand. Why wasn't it removed? Mr. Crabtree, it has been removed. Do you still feel a sensation? Yes, that's usual. It's known as the phantom limb. Are you in pain? No, it feels as if it's really there. That will pass, Mr. Crabtree. Now, are you up for a visitor? Your sisters have been waiting for some time. Yes, thank you. Good. And I'll get somebody to bring you a cup of tea. It's surprising how vulnerable hospitals can make you feel. When a person is undergoing some sort of operation where an anaesthetic is used, I suppose it's the closest we can get to death without actually dying. Perhaps it's because we cling to life so much that it is that makes us emotional. Because that's what I became when I saw Maggie and Zoe. Zoe was horrified at seeing her older brother cry, as she'd never seen that before. But after I recovered myself, just to see and talk to them was great. Maggie's biggest news was that she and Sam had set a date for their wedding and excitedly informed me that they had found a house, so I reiterated again that I would buy it for them. It was a pleasure to see her excitement. My mother sent her love, apparently, but from my father there was no word. So when are you getting out? Asked Maggie. They said if there's no complications, then I can be released in about 5 days. I think they want to see the back of me. Why is that, John? Asked Zoe. Is it because of what you've done? Just about. And how do you feel about that now that it's over? Honestly, Maggie, I'm all right with it. Like it's all over. Life can return to normal. What's the state of the media? You are still all over the place, John. No sign of dropping off just yet. What are you going to do when you leave here? I won't be coming home. I'll return to the flat, and then when I'm well enough, I'm going to travel. Get out the country. Go somewhere where there's a chance I won't be recognised. And I might just get one of them bionic hands. But you'll come back for the wedding, won't you? Of course I will, Maggie. I wouldn't miss it for the world. So, are you both going away? Maggie could only mean Caroline, and I tried to smile, but I don't think I was convincing. Well, I'm not too sure about that. We had a falling out. She hasn't visited. Perhaps she will. Perhaps she won't. I'm sorry. Was it about your hand? Something like that. I dare say I'll call her after I get out. She knows I'm in here. We'll see what happens. You ought not to let her go, John. We all could see that she's very fond of you. Yeah, well, we'll see how that works out. I was released 6 days later, a day longer than I was promised because of a small infection at the site of the wound. But by then I was more than ready to leave. So I left, hobbling with my crutch, feeling like a complete wreck. The staff finally began to be kinder towards me near the end, although not one of them spoke about my decision. I came to the conclusion that they had been instructed not to mention it. Joyce was indifferent. She greeted me, but was certainly cold in her attitude. She did warn me, though, that sacks of mail was still arriving, and due to the lack of space, she had made the decision, along with Miss Vilvock, to enter my flat and deposit them within. Therefore, that's what greeted me on stiffly pushing my door open. Stiffly, because the entirety of my main lobby was so full, I had to struggle to get in. Moreover, the pile rose to almost to the ceiling, and there were so many that they spilled from the lobby even into the passageway that led to my main living room. I made a mental note to get the scouts back in, and another to get some other people in to take away the black plastic bags for recycling. But I was instantly angry, and if I had had full use of both my feet, I would have kicked out. Wading through them, I switched on all the services and brewed coffee before I, at last, sat at my breakfast table and stared at the view over South London as I puffed on my vape. Then, making a decision, I called Jennifer, and she answered straight away. Oh, I didn't expect you to pick up once you saw it as me. Hello, John. It's been reported that you left the hospital. Oh, I didn't see anybody. Nevertheless, people know. They probably know where you are right at this instant. Are you at the flat? Yes, and I've a problem, Jennifer, and one that only you can help me with. You want me to come over? If you wouldn't mind, I'll pay for your time. Don't be a jerk. I'll be there in about an hour. The line went dead. When I answered the door to her, Jennifer used quite a few choice words as she stared at the massive mountain of correspondence that occupied the entirety of my main lobby, almost to the ceiling. Thanks for coming. This is the problem. If I wasn't so handicapped, I could deal with him, but obviously I can't. I didn't like the way she looked at me. With my leg in the plastic boot and my hand wrapped in bandages, I must have looked pathetic. I felt very far from the able-bodied man she used to know. I believe it was then that she realised just how much I'd suffered. Right. First things first. As I said, if you remember, the stamps would be useful to a collector. All that in hand. I've got the scouts doing that. I've got to hand it, and I've got to get them in again. Joyce told me that the letters are still arriving every day. It's mad. All right then, so how are you? I'm good, apart from still feeling that my hand's still there. Ah, that old thing. Yes, I read about that. You can still feel with the fingers that aren't there. Very much so. It's still freaking me out, but they told me it will fade. Are you working? I remember what you said. Actually, it's been okay. Work's been flooding in and I'm busy. I can't believe it, really. Talk about an up and down world. It's even taken me by surprise. One minute the public's baying for my blood and next I'm all charming and needed. Oddly enough, we are even planning to make a documentary if we can raise the funding. I say if, but it's a certainty that we'll get it considering how close we are to the story. Well, so glad that somebody's making money then. Just don't ask me to be in it. Would I ask you? Would you? Just say a short interview? Just me and a camera? I'll think about it. Excellent. So, how's you and Caroline? Little bird told me that you and she are having a baby. What? Who told you that? It's not true. We did get a bit close, but that's over now. Who said that? It was on X. Oh, a place where you go to for the truth. No, it's not true. But you aren't together anymore? Are you speaking with your reporter's hat on now? Okay, a bit. But just between you and me? I'm sure we're finished. But you're fond of her. I can see that. Okay, I'm not over her. But what can I do? Nothing. Just get on with things. And what does getting on with things mean? Well, the plan is I'm going to reorganise my money, change my name and my appearance, and if I can get permission to travel out the country, I want to rent a house on Atlantic Avenue, Seagate. That doesn't sound local to me at all. Where is that? New York. It overlooks Gravesend Bay. Check it out. It's a place I always wanted to go. Don't ask me why, because I can't tell you. It's going to be bliss, because no one will know who I am. And how long will you stay there? As long as my visa says I can. But whatever happens, I'll be back by December. Why then? Well, two reasons. One, I've been told I will be ready for a prosthetic hand. And secondly, I will be attending my sister's wedding. So it's all mapped out then. Pretty much. I tell you, only you can appreciate the feeling of freedom I'm feeling knowing that it's all over. And the hand? Burnt to hell. Destroyed in the hospital's furnace. Did you see it burn? No, but I was told on good authority that it was. It's okay, so what's going to happen to this place? I had intended to sell, but then I thought, well, why not keep it? When I return from America, I'll need somewhere to stay, so why not here? You could lease it. No, I can't be doing with that. Although, having said that, I'm sure Anne Walker, the estate agent, might be able to help me out there, so it'll be an income. I can't imagine anybody not wanting to live here. The home of the man who could travel in time. It's a winner. Yeah, but all I want is for that all to go away. No fuss, no glory. I still think you've got your head in the sand a little, John. It's going to take a little bit more than a change of a name and growing a beard to make this story of a century go away, so you ought to be prepared for it to run into years. That evening we enjoyed a final pizza together, and it was nice having someone there. But when she left, I did begin to feel alone again. But after a few G&Ts, I fell asleep quickly enough. Life moved in and on, in stages from that point on. I changed my name. A visa was granted. I shopped for new clothes, had my boot removed, gave the crutch back to the hospital, and most importantly purchased a plane ticket to New York and left England during a heatwave mid-August and landed in an even hotter one, at least 10 degrees hotter, and you cannot have any conception of how refreshing it was to have not a soul look at me twice. I wandered through the streets of New York, looking like an anonymous ghost. It was lovely. The original 1940s house I rented was beautiful, and the area was quiet. I'm not surprised that it was part of an exclusive area, a gated community. but in the few months I spent there, I didn't get to know my neighbours at all, which was kind of depressing. Still, I spent my days dividing my time between lazing on the beachfront and sightseeing in New York. An email alerting me that my prosthetic hand was ready, and so by the beginning of December my plane touched down at Heathrow, with me looking more tanned than I ever looked. So to cut a long story short, my amazing hand was fitted, and, here's the surprise, when I attended Maggie and Sam's wedding mid-December, I walked into St. Michael's Church with Caroline on my arm, now looking like an obvious couple. The way that came about is a story for another time, but I will say that she enjoyed the 1940s house as much as I did. However, the information and attention about me, at least on the internet, never went away entirely, as Jennifer had predicted. Mostly it composed of reports that I was dead, along with Maximilian, but there were countless arguments against that, and hardly a week would pass without someone, somewhere, claiming that they had seen me and Maximilian separately and together. Well, I can't be sure about me, but I'm damn sure that they didn't see Maximilian. However, I was thankful that my former life was slowly submerging into a mixture of lies, legend, suspicion, and conspiracy. But perhaps the most outrageous thing I ever saw was that some enterprising group or person had set up an internet site where anybody who had a proposition to put to me could post it. And that's where the crazies began to swarm like a nest of wasps, because when I looked at it, the extent of where these people wanted to go in time was nothing short of extraordinary, and ranged from those things that had already been brought to my attention, such as to rectify sad, localized events in their life, to going back and preventing truly gargantuan events such as wars and all the products of war such as genocide happening. But what really surprised me was I was surprised to read some easily identifiable names of scientists begging to be taken back so that they could examine past civilizations. And to cap it all, there were hundreds of these requests from professionals. The surprising thing, apart from the enormous sums being offered, was the degree of hate towards me, something that Jennifer had predicted, of course. And it was that intense outbreak spilling over the internet that made me realise that what I did was the correct thing, both for me, my sanity, and Caroline, of course. Of course, one downside to all this good fortune was that I no longer was able to use my qualifications, as that John Crabtree, the bespectacled, bullied geek, had effectively disappeared. But nonetheless, I was happily working quietly in my study on such unsolvable problems such as the Riemann hypothesis, amongst others. If one day I do crack it, then the £1 million prize money would be useful. Caroline and I watched the true life documentary made by Jennifer and Morton and found it wasn't all that bad, actually. I did eventually sell my flat, and we moved temporarily into one of the guest houses on the Nibley Dawson estate, over which Caroline now had complete control. And we had not been there all that long before she informed me that we were to be joined by a third, if you take my meaning. For a long time we discussed where we wanted to put down proper roots, and we are still talking about it. One day, in the spring of the following year, we were enjoying morning coffee as we relaxed on our veranda overlooking the Nibley Dawson estate, when I took Caroline's hand. You know, now it's impossible. I want to ask you a question. Oh? What's that? It's just that it's a question that's been on my mind for some time. And that is, if you could travel anywhere in time, where would you go? And for what reason? Well, that is a question, John. Let me give that some serious thought. Yes, you do that, I smiled.
You have been listening to an audio production of The Luckiest Man in the World by Molly Cutpurse, narrated by John Crabtree PhD.